So, how's everybody doing today? It's your good pal, Amigo Aaron. This disaster is off to a brilliant start. We're going to try a couple different things here tonight. And the first thing I want to try that's different is I'm going to have, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to try to have special guests in the chat. We're going to try the new guest star, the guest star gimmick. And I think I may have a guest standing by. I'm going to try it here. It's if you when I get them fixed up, it'll be Rob Flack O'Hara. So there we go. Bam! Look at that. It's like magic, everybody.
Let me tell you, I know this is the first time we did this, so I'm going to give you some feedback.
All right.
A thing popped on my screen for 4 seconds that said, Amigo Aaron has asked you to join his stream. Then that went away, and then I spent 5 minutes trying to find where that went.
Yeah. Yeah. So they've got it all ironed out, then, is what you're saying, Flack.
Then I clicked on that, and it said, you can't really do this until we verified your phone number. So give us your phone number.
Yeah.
And I did that. And it said, all right. And then it said, let's get that camera and microphone working. And then Google Chrome said, oh, God, somebody's trying to use your camera and microphone. I said, it's okay, boys. It's all right.
Yeah.
This is on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I checked all that. I got the microphone and the thing working. It says, great. And then it said, what's your phone number again? So I gave it my phone number again. And then it texted me a 6-digit code.
Yeah.
And I put that code in, and then it said, all right, go to your authentication app and get the code from that.
Yeah.
And put that in. I'm going to tell you this. I went with my wife today to the credit union.
Yeah.
So that she could get a line of credit, like a hefty 6-figure line of credit for a business she's launching.
Yeah.
And there was less authentication than that than I just went through.
So what you're saying is it's seamless.
I mean, I thought maybe you were streaming the codes to get into Fort Knox or something.
Yeah, hi, Pixel. Sorry. Look at that.
Hey, there's the man.
The phone now. See, this is already a grand success. What could make it better? I'll tell you what. Another guy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, bam. I said bam. Look at that. There he is.
Holy camole.
Now it's a party.
All right, I will say I'm Chris Petzel KZ9ZAP.
So let me ask you, Pixels and Dawn, while I got you on here. I know it's late out your neck of the woods.
It certainly is.
What's it take that you've just recently released your new magazine? I assume has it hit the stands yet, Pix?
Not yet, though.
When can we expect it to come out?
It will. Well, you can buy it from the website now, but it won't be in shops until about the 15th. So
I see. What's it take? How much does it take to put something like that to bed? I mean, how many man hours do you figure it takes to put something like that to bed?
Well, all the ones where I'm not in my day job, all those hours. So, a lot of man hours. It's pretty much non-stop, to be honest. Except for the days where I just fall asleep, or actually have something to do in my real life. But otherwise, I'm proofreading or writing or contacting people or whatever most of the rest of my time. So it's I mean, you know well enough. You run a million different podcasts. It's pretty much straight from one thing to the next thing
well,
all the time.
Is,
so.
I've seen your magazine. This could just be me, but it seems like you put a little bit more effort into it than what we do. It seems like a lot more effort's involved. I know it's great that you guys have had that much success on this. I'm going to try something real quick. I know I keep saying that. If you'll indulge me one more time here. I'm trying to play with the volumes on these things. So you guys are in all the stores and all the magazine areas in the UK, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how far internationally does your arms reach for the magazine? Because I knew I'd heard people say that you could get it here somewhere, which I've not seen it. But I mean, could you go to Australia and get it? Could you get it in Taiwan? Like, where can you go? Canada?
So you're meant to be able to get it in Barnes and Noble in the US in
Yeah.
some places. You can. It's meant to be in Australia, and I think one person has bought it in Australia. It's a bit harder to actually get it into stores. There's less kind of chain stores, chain news agents in Australia, I think. It's also in a chain called Easons in Ireland. So I'll see whether that's the case in January, because I've not been over there since we started selling. And that's about it, really. But that's still quite a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that you got it off the ground at all is remarkable to me. If you want the honest truth.
Yeah.
Not because you guys don't have the talent, just because it's 2022. You know, so
Absolutely agree. This
Yeah.
fact, running through the pandemic is just a bit of a miracle.
how is the sister magazine doing?
Pretty good. The difficulty with Pixel Addict, I think, is Amiga Addict. You can sort of go, right, I know exactly where to find all of the Amiga fans and point this straight at them and advertise this to them. With something which is a bit more broad, it's a bit harder to. I mean, you can just broadly send out some advertising to people, but it's a bit harder to target the audience as well. But it's doing okay. It's sort of getting along.
Now,
It's not quite as successful as Amiga Addict just yet. But
it's just younger magazine. Tell the people what can they look for in Pixel Addict exactly? What comes or what are you guys covering that one? Obviously not Amiga as much, but what is it? What do you go into?
So they kind of pitch it as kind of a sort of computing lifestyle magazine, but it's basically covering everything which doesn't fit into Amiga Addict. So all your different micros and your different consoles. I actually know. I do have the latest copy just here because I brought it from upstairs. So how convenient. So this has got everything from Open Roller Coaster Tycoon to the sort of Apple Newton and things like that.
Oh man, what? That's part of the lifestyle. The old Newton. Oh God, no. I love it.
There's some jumping into some BBC basic kind of stuff.
Actual basic machines that you cover, or
it's kind of everything. It's kind of whatever we can pick up. The thing that amused me, I recently went to the Museum of Computing in Cambridge, and I met a guy there, and he seemed to have every machine under the sun. And I thought, this guy is perfect for this. This is great. I said, right, I need to put you in contact with the guys at Pixel Addict. And he goes, oh, yeah, I already write for them. It's like, oh, okay. So I guess I was on the right track, but they already picked me to the post there. But so I had to sort of step back, slightly embarrassed. But yeah, he was already a writer for Pixel Addict, because I've got all sorts of community people in there. There's a few different bits from different YouTubers and stuff as well, like Control Alt Reese is in this particular issue as well, and it's a bit of everything, really.
Let me guess, is he writing about Atari?
Yeah. Have you gone in any shops to watch somebody look through the magazine or to find it or anything?
I wish. I know Jonah and James went into a branch of W.H. Smith's. I can't remember where now. And someone was picking up and buying the magazine as they were there. Just by coincidence. I've never seen that happen. And they foolishly didn't chase the person down and say, look, we're these people in the magazine, which they should have done. But so whether I'll ever get the opportunity to do that, I don't know. But
when I was writing for Video Game Trader magazine, one of the things they pitched was that on the staff page they would put little pictures of everyone's face, and I was in a used game store, and there was a guy there shopping, another guy shopping, and then there was a manager, and the guy was looking through used Nintendo games or something, and he said, "Man, I just wish they had like a list of all the games, then I could just keep track of what I had." And they had just, the Video Game Trader had just published that issue had complete game lists, you know. And I said, I turned to the manager. I said, "You sell a magazine here that has that?" And she went, "We do." And I went over and I got it, and I pulled it off the shelf, and I go, "Here's the complete list right here." And she goes, "How did you know that?" And I turned to the front page and go, "Because that's me." I'm right there, and I had my face. And I'm telling you what, I mean, as a kid, I practiced magic tricks. So I could have never pulled off anything great. It was like just the perfect alignment. And it was like a drop the mic moment afterwards. I was like, "Here you go." And I turned and walked out. I was like, oh, like popping my own collar. It was such a neat moment.
You know, since we've got a magazine aficionado here, and I'm going to ask Petzel and you, Flack, if you what do you think in the classic computer or console industry deserves more coverage, or maybe its own magazine? Do you have a thought?
Well, you know, I think what we've seen in general is there's like this 20 to 30 year age where things become retro. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
when I first found out like there were other people playing old games, Atari was just climbing and starting to go through the roof, and nobody wanted 16-bit stuff. You know what I mean? And then we've seen that, right? Like, as we've gone over time, we've seen Nintendo hit it big, the 16-bit, and now, like, I mean, if you have a bunch of old Nintendo 64 stuff, you're sitting on gold. Like, people are really into Nintendo 64 right now, you know? So I'd like to see maybe something DOS related, but again, you know, kind of the hurdles we talked about before is that it encompasses such a long a period of time. So from a entertainment standpoint, I'd like to see that. The problem is, unlike the Amiga stuff, people are still making Amiga hardware. You know, I mean, like, you guys feature on your show that there's new Amiga cards and things coming out all the time, and Pixel, I'm sure. I mean, you know, you've got people advertising because you've got this community. So I don't know what DOS people, what you'd be like, "Hey, I got a CRT at Goodwill." You know, like, I don't know what people like funding wise. I don't know how it would work very well, but.
Well, I think we're kind of in a golden age of retro, and that there's a lot of coverage of a lot of things. One thing I don't see is in television. Where's the Intellivision magazines? You know, but again, there's a very small subset of games for that. It was like less than 100, I think, initially, and there's maybe about that now in homebrew games. So it's not thousands and thousands like you have with other systems, but. Yeah, that's the only thing I can think of.
Do you ever listen to the Intellivision areas? Are they still making shows?
Oh, they did just release one. I don't think they've released their traditional game review interview show for like 2 years.
Really?
They've done a couple shows per year in the past couple of years, and then every show is like, yeah, we're working on a show, but yeah, they do, and you know, I think the last episode was only maybe 2 hours, you know, so it was really short for them. You know, they're the ones that had the 7, like they had one that was 7 hours or 5 hours, I think.
Yeah,
but it was great. I really, I love the Intellivision.
Those guys are in depth, to say the least.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, I like the Intellivision, but I've got sort of it's a passing fancy, basically. And those guys were there's a guy that did a Jaguar show too. It was a game by game Jag show, which that poor long suffering guy. You could ponder that. And this show was so in depth that I just couldn't take it. It was just too in depth for me. You know, I mean, I'm me and Bo are like the light souffle or the potato chips of game review shows, and I don't know how these guys spend the time. Especially, if think about if you're the guy that's reviewing the worst that the Jag has to offer, and you're going into vivid detail in terms of the scoring system and how the thing was made and all the various rules and what all the keypad numbers do. I mean, it would drive you insane. And he got into it he probably got about 15 games in, and I've never heard from him since. I'm assuming he gave up.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, at least in television, there's some stuff there you can sink your teeth into, I guess. But some of these guys, it's tough. There's game-by-game podcasts. There's no easy task to pull off.
If that Intellivision relaunch had gone well, I think there probably could have been a good market for an Intellivision magazine. But then the way that thing kind of folded in.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody would touch right now. By the way, while we've been talking, Aaron has played 48 games of Telengard. Each one takes about 12 seconds from my experience.
You noticed that? You noticed I was playing that, did you? Yeah, I was like, you know, I played this. I used this to play that for the show. Me and Brent did, and I was like, man, I just to make sure that I downloaded different versions. No, it's just deadly on every version. There's the Amico. The Amico needs its own magazine. You got it, Buck. It needs its own console too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that thing, it fell off the earth. I'm assuming we're never going to see that thing. I feel bad for the people that like paid the big money and were the big believers in that.
I was this close. I was this close to doing it. I really liked the idea. It looked great, but you know, it's unfortunate that it's become vaporware.
What draws you to the Intellivision exactly?
I don't know.
I mean,
I do know.
There?
When I was a kid, I had a 2600, and my next door neighbor had the Intellivision, and that thing seemed so much more advanced. And we would go, and I would drive the I can't remember the name of the car racing game, but I figured out how you could run through the track and then go on to different tracks, because really the grid for the tracks was all the tracks, and you just started in one track, but you could drive into different tracks. You know, stuff like that. It was just fascinating when I was a kid. And B-17 Bomber, I loved play. My neighbor, the poor girl, she just gets so bored with me flying around Europe, you know, to bombing places. Take 15 minutes to fly somewhere. But yeah, I think that's probably where that comes from, is just, you know, good memories of going to my neighbor's house and having fun.
Was it I almost said George Papard, George Plimpton, where he would do those.
That's a big difference.
He would do those. George Foreman. I'm just throwing out
George Foreman. It's all the Georges.
But he would do those commercials, and because the thing is, when you're a kid, I think you're so accepting. Like, I was so happy to have Pac-Man at home that people would go, "That looks like garbage," and you're like, "So? Like, I'm 8 years old. I don't have a car. I can't go to the arcade, so this is fine with me." It didn't bother me in the slightest, you know? And so, but then when he would come on those commercials and he'd be wearing his suit, you know, and he'd be like, "Atari football only has 3 players." And then you look at it, you're like, God, he's right. They don't even have heads. They're just like little bodies with feet on. You're like, huh, you know, and he's like, Intellivision football has all these people. And he would show you every sport thing, and it didn't matter that every person in every game looked identical. You're like, wow, the people in football look a lot like the guy from Tron, but who cares, you know, because they got arms and legs. It's amazing. What are our other two guests? What are their history with DOS games and DOS machines?
There you go. What is it, fellas?
So I have some experience with actual DOS machines. So when I was at school, they were just starting to pick up on the early 86 x86 machines. But my school had a specialist visually impaired unit attached on the side, and that was one of the things that I did. My best mate was blind, and they had a spare 286 in there they weren't doing anything with. So we used to disappear into there on our lunch breaks, and we installed emulators on there, and we installed games on there, and we'd sit around playing the odd DOS game and like Spectrum games on Spectrum emulator and things like that. And that was part of my experience. At home, I jumped in at the Windows 95 point. So it was similar to what you were saying before. There were still things where you had to drop out into DOS to do things or run things through the command prompt. And I and you had the advantage at that point, the sort of 1997 kind of period of you start to get big abandonware sites getting set up and things like that, where you could go and pick
Right.
up
Yeah, there
some
was kind of a
old
gap,
DOS
kind of a
games
gap there. Yeah.
and play a load of that stuff. So things like you I always remember the DOS version of Micro Machines 2 was actually really good. It ran really well. And things like your Jazz Jackrabbits.
I was going to say Jazz Jackrabbit would be right from that era. A lot of the Aladdin.
Yeah. The original Prince of Persia and Prince of Persia 2, and things like that. So yeah, I had the opportunity to dip into those things, and also round a friend of my parents' house, they had a PC which they used for the business, but that had some DOS games on it as well, like I think the original Microsoft Flight Simulator, Microsoft Golf, and things like that. I can't quite remember what else they had, but it was kind of like it was a different experience, because it's kind of like this: you have this machine that you can play on, and you're limited to only the things that are on here, and like demo discs and demo CDs and things like this. And these are the only things that you can occupy yourself with for the next few hours. So.
Yeah. Someone in chat just beat me to it, but I was going to say, like, I have a somewhere around here. It's sitting around here somewhere. But I have a 3.5-inch disc that was just a survivor and never got tossed. But it has Prince of Persia and Rogue and Tetris all on one 3.5-inch floppy. Like, I could the size, especially Prince of Persia. You think of it being a huge game, but. This and there was just a little window where games were still that small. I remember Indy 500 fit on a floppy. There were just a few games, and then like I don't know why, but things like that stick in my head. Like I remember Aladdin was 3 floppies, and then Mortal Kombat 2 I think was like 8 floppies. So Mortal Kombat 1 I think was 3, but it was just like this little window where games went to VGA, but they were still small, and then you're like, I don't want to download 2 discs or 8.
They were brutal
Sky
to download
Roads.
those big ones.
I played a ton of Sky Roads. I remember that now. Really good DOS game.
What about you, Petzel? Are you an old DOS gamer? Or?
Well, not really. No. In 1990, I was a senior in high school, 1991, and in the small town that I was from, there was a Radio Shack. So the school bought Tandy 1000s, and so people in the town were buying Tandy 1000s. I had an Amiga, so people would ask me, "Hey, how do you use this?" So I had to kind of help people with their Tandy 1000s because no one else, it was the closest thing to a Tandy 1000 expert. So we played games on their Tandy 1000s. We played games at school, but my first PC that I had was. I bought in 1994 or 95, and it was a Windows 95 PC. It was a 486 DX4. So that's kind of where I personally went into.
I had one of those DX4 one. Cause that's one thing a lot of people forget if you're not from that era was it wasn't just like you said. Once you got into Pentium, it was like, well, I've got a Pentium 133, I've got a Pentium 166, but back in the 286, that architecture. It was like, I've got a 386 SX 16.
Right,
I have a 386 DX 240. Like those are 2 very different experiences, and 486s, man, it just seemed like every time you turn around, like I had a 25, a 33, a 50, a 66, and then that DX4 100. And that was at a time when not only for DOS machines did you show your manhood by how fast your processor was, but also how big was your tower. And I had a tower that was about this tall. I mean, it had like 4 or 5 regular drive bays, and then the mini drive bays, and inside, and I mean, you could put a week's worth of laundry in that thing. I mean, it was just gigantic.
I still refer to what we normally call a tower as a mid tower, because that's what it is. It's not a
Right.
full-size tower.
Yeah.
My junior at work asked me, why do you call it a mid-tower? I'm like, well, towers used to be this tall. That's a tower.
Mhm.
And of
Yeah,
course, I had a desktop size. I had, like this. So I couldn't compete on that size.
I remember I had a friend, both of us had 286s, and ours was a 28610, but he had a turbo button. And when you press turbo, that little 10 changed to a 12, And I was like, now we're cooking with power. And I went to my friend's house, and his said low, L-O. And when he pressed it, it said high. And I was like mind blown. And then he was like, yeah, man, if you just open it up and look, and it's all the little connections to show what lights up. And I was just completely blown. And I mean, we, try to come up with little, like, I think at one time I don't know, we try to make it say like 2 letters of a dirty word, and then like HE, and then you turbo and it would say LL, and you're like, oh yeah.
I could never get those things to look right. I tried. I never could set them up right. They always looked like crap when I tried to fool with them. I didn't get it. I don't know why. Those things are a pain. And the funny thing about those turbo buttons is most of the time, often they would just make your computer was running at top speed. You'd hit them to go lower. Sometimes it was always different, and back in the day. It's funny you were talking about the gap between the 386s. Man, that is something that it's hard to explain now, because when people just say, okay, this ran on the 386, the difference between like an SX and a DX, or a 486 SX and a DX, and the fact that those chips were around for a long time. For me, it seems like they were around, that 386s and 486s were around forever, before the Pentium came around. And I couldn't in my wildest dreams think about getting a Pentium. I had a Cyrix 46 that fit in a 386 slot as my first machine that I bought, because I couldn't afford a proper 486. They were too expensive,
I was working at Best Buy. The era that I worked at Best Buy, we had this we had like 4 brands. We had Hewlett Packards, we had Acers, I think we had actual IBMs. But they were all 486s, like the whole row of all the computers, And I remember one day the machine on the very end was a Pentium 60, and we had to take the last one, the lowest 486 off the line, and move everything down. And then, a month later, there was a Pentium 75, and then we took that one off. And I was like, I remember shaking my head. I was like, someday these are all gonna be Pentiums. And eventually they were.
Then they had the MMX chipset that came out there. You had to get that. It's not a chipset, but the extra instructions. You had to get that thing going. You're right. The Pentiums did seem to go quicker, and then they changed more radically with each different design of the thing. The 2s, the 3s, those slot-based carts and all this crap. All your motherboards were trashed. You had to go back to the
motherboard would never work. You upgrade a chip, and I was into when it got to that era, I got into Cyrix chips because they were cheaper. So I'd be like, I got a Cyrix 5 zillion, and they're like, well, it runs like dog crap. You go, who cares? Look at all the numbers on this thing.
You had to get the AMDs. K62, and then you try to figure out which one was the equivalent of what, especially when you're trying to play games. Well, does the AMD K62 100, is that as fast as the Pentium 100? The clock speed says 66. You're trying to figure all that crap out. I don't miss that, to be honest with you.
I think Magic Carpet was the first game that we got in at Best Buy that said requires a Pentium.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I saw that, my heart sank, because I think I still had a 386 at the time too. And I was like,
you should have had an Amiga when it came out and see what you felt like. Because I was waiting for that thing to come to the Amiga. And that's when my buddy jumped ship off the Amiga. He's like, well, I'm out. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, they're not getting that. I'm like, oh. And he was right. And he was gone. And I was the same way with X-Wing. I was like, hoping the Amiga would get it. And we never got it, clearly. The writing was on the wall that it was a sad day with the crappy old PC somehow caught up to the Amiga. I didn't see it coming, because I thought the PC, I mean, I had an Amiga for a while, and you look at the PC equivalent, it was generally garbage, which is why it's all the more stunning to me that PC and DOS gaming have made this big, huge resurgence. Because I tossed a bunch of DOS stuff because I thought to myself, no one's wanting this ever.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
one wants this crap. But man, here they come. It just goes to show you that everyone's got their hot button, I guess, when it comes to what they're nostalgic for.
The best thing for me working at Best Buy was, this is like 94, 95. So we'd had computers at that point for, 15 years at home, and in 15 years, I'd never seen an original disc of anything. And so like we'd go into Best Buy and I'd go over and like straighten up the software and I'd be like, oh, that's what an original looks like. That, and even better would be when someone would return a game, they'd buy something because it was pretty, especially CD-ROM stuff right there. Like, like most places were pretty hip to piracy. Like you couldn't just buy a game with a whole bunch of discs and bring it back the next day and be like, oh, I don't like this game. We'd be like, well, you bought it, so good luck. But if you had a CD-ROM, we would think, well, nobody could copy a CD-ROM. So, okay, well, we'll just take it back. And you'd have the manual and I'd just sit there and look through it. And I'd be like, oh, these come with manuals and instructions. These games are really amazing. I didn't know they had all this stuff in
You
there.
can't tell me you never photocopied someone's manuals and then printed them all out. Surely.
I have, I think I've may have shown this on a stream, but no, what I would do, I had an entire spiral notebook of handwritten instructions. So like when a friend bought Little Computer People and I wrote down Control P, pet the guy, and Control C, make a phone. So yeah, my docs were all like handwritten in pencil.
Anytime you've handwritten pet the guy and something, you better be careful who looks at it.
I have like 4 pages of Bard's Tale spells I had to write all these things on.
I had a copy of the Bard's Tale manual. Yeah, that was what I knew I would need. But
my mom was a secretary for a while at a place, and when one of my friends would buy a game, I would be like, "Hey, can you take this to work and make a copy?" And so in my head, it's just like her unfolding the map to pirates and trying to figure out how to get this on a Xerox. So she was our source for that, and for cheap photocopied AD&D character sheets.
Oh yeah.
One guy would buy the thing, and of course they were like, remember they came on yellow paper?
Yeah, it was like a light orange or something. Yeah.
Right, and so you make a copy and it'd be all black, and we didn't care.
No.
well, since you're talking about boxed software, it's a little show and tell.
Oh boy.
GBRL.
Oh, there it is.
my
Nice.
original
Look at
copy, and you were talking about it being kind of a simple game.
Yeah.
It is for an unexpanded Amiga 500. You can run this on 512K, and in the box you get not only the disc, but the Buckeye Bulletin.
That's the newspaper they were talking about.
We
That's
talked
cool.
about that. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's upside down.
It looks.
Yeah,
That's a
go.
great way to do it.
Yeah. I'm sure I read this when I was a kid, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. I haven't looked in this, for probably 30 years, but
and it's
yeah,
great when your copy protection revolves around you made something that's too large to fit on a copier. They're like, we spoiled them.
That's right.
Petzel, is that an original that you had from when you were a kid?
Yes. I got it for Christmas in probably 88 probably.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
That game
cool.
That game was kind of a bummer, if I'm honest, because there was a lot of potential there for a lot of different gameplay elements. They just sort of like didn't do any of them. They just gave up, basically.
Well, the box says you have 16 unique challenges and 256 levels of difficulty.
Yeah, well.
So they might have missed a few of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there's some difficulty there.
Yeah,
right. And I mean, you got to get sometimes like loading a game can be a challenge.
Right.
That's one, and
Well,
how to get that newspaper on a copier, that's got a challenge.
Was that newspaper did this game have copy protection?
I don't remember there being like having to go into the paper to do
that would have been clever, actually. I didn't thought of it until Flack said it, but yeah, that would. The worst things when you ever try to go in and gently take apart a code wheel and then try to make your own code wheel out of that code wheel with
you return it to somebody else, like you hey, can I borrow that? And you return it back, and it's like some piece of crap bread you found, and you're like, Oh no, beats me.
I mean, we've all done that. I know you picks. Even a man of your
Oh, yeah.
stature has went down that road of evil.
I've certainly done the fiddle with the photocopier settings to try and make it copy the old black on black code books and things like that. Definitely been down that road before. And in fact, the copy of Worms that I have for the Amiga, which is one that I repurchased more recently, the code booklet is kind of falling apart because someone's clearly already done that at some point in the past. So.
You know, with our little our fake not fake but really immature juvenile Commodore cracking group, the OK Crackers, our very first crack, I'm going to use air quotes, crack, was Battle Chess, and it came with I don't remember if it was a code wheel or if it's actually in the book, but it would say I think it was in the book actually, and it would list famous chess games, and you had to go in and it would tell you what the opening move of each one was. So if it was like A2 to A4, and you had to type that in, and we just used a sector editor and went through and found, and all that was just in plain text. So we changed every single one of them to say OKK with an exclamation mark just on the disc and saved it. So then in the intro, you know, we just said, yeah, our guys cracked this, just type OKK and you'll bypass that. Just really as equally as embarrassing for Electronic Arts as it should be for us.
Yeah, really though. Yeah, first of all, you should. I mean, Flack, in case you don't know it, wrote the book on this sort of thing. Great book, Commodore. I mean, it's the first time I'd ever read any of your stuff, and I just loved it because I related to it so completely. Even though I didn't have a C64, the rest of it I was right there with you. And your adventures in there, and then of course on your on You Don't Know Flack, the podcast where you go into the OK Crackers in an episode. What was, and I say this knowing what the OK Crackers were, but what was it like to be the spoke in, or maybe you're the axle and the wheel of a pirate group like that? I mean, you guys were really actively out there trying to establish yourself in the area, in the field. What was that like when you actually got it yourselves over?
You know, I think, and first of all, like, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10 of all these groups and stuff, like we were like a 2. I mean, we were so like, we were just dopey kind of, you know, like doing all the secondhand kid stuff. Like other people would crack stuff. And really what it started out was because me and this other guy, who by the way was at least 20 years older than me, he was like calling long distance and getting software and then uploading it to local boards. And we were like, well, and then I would get it like things from him and then just call every board in town, like spend 24 hours calling every board and spreading stuff. And so we kind of came up with this idea, like, if we're doing this, we should get some credit for it, you know, which is how, you know, 14-year-old's mind works. So so we were like, let's just put our name on everything. And so we started doing that. And then you know, he knew another guy that was like, hey, I kind of know assembly. I think I can take copy protection off stuff if you guys could get discs. And so it just kind of steamrolled. But I mean, I always tell people, like, I was by far the least technical guy. Like I was the Steve Jobs, you know, which is not I don't mean that in a good way or a bragging way, but like, if you know the old Atari history and Apple history, like Steve Jobs would come in and be like, hey, can you do that? And then Wozniak would spend all night programming. And I always wished I were the Wozniak, but I was always the Steve Jobs. I would just be like uploading and posting and be like, OKK, just, you know, just going around and just being
the
this
hype
loud.
Man. Hype man.
I was the Flavor Flav of the group. Just the annoying loud kid, you know, and just start fights with people, and then I'd go make fake accounts and reply and be like, no man, OKK is the best, and then sign it with the wrong name on accident. I was a mess, you know. But you know, it never I mean, in the early days of all that, like when you're a kid, I did not worry about the legal implications of anything, you know. But then you get a couple years older, and then like I think everybody that was in that era or in that kind of scene and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And again, I'm real careful not to like say, oh, like I was in the scene or whatever, because we were just, you know, goofy kids doing stuff. But like I think everybody had these close calls or, you know, things where you like thought like like something bad. Like I was a co-sysop of this guy's BBS. I called it every day, and we had this agreement. He was like, you know, I'll do all this stuff, and I, you know, basically he had 2 floppy drives, and the second one I just said I'll always keep it filled with new games. I would just every day I would call and upload stuff, you know, and then he started saying like, hey man, your modem's too slow. So he was like, I got a faster modem and I'll sell you for like $50 when they were selling for like 200. And I was like, heck yeah. And I got this modem, and then he was hooking me up with stuff. And one day I called and the BBS didn't answer. And I think I'd loaned him something even. And again, this guy was older than me. And so my mom took me over to his house, and that house was empty. I mean, and the living room was trashed. And then the next day his name was in the newspaper, and it, like he had been doing credit card fraud and all this stuff. And then that's the moment where you're like, man, maybe that wasn't a good idea. Maybe I've just spent 2 years doing something I shouldn't have been doing, you know? And then you kind of watch over your shoulder for a while, but then it doesn't take long to fall back into it. You're like, well, now that guy's gone. I guess I'll start calling some other BBS or something, you know? But yeah, there were just a few times like that where there was a guy one time, again, and you know, I have to preface this by saying, like, I had somebody write a review of Commodore one time and go, this guy was the most egotistical, self-centered, you know, and I was like, you know, all these stories happened like when I was 15. So it's not like, if you're really looking for, you know, mature historical look at computing, it's probably not the book, you know. I mean, it's more like this is goofy stuff we did as kids, you know. But there was this guy, and his name was Doc Dread, and I don't know, he didn't like what we were doing, and we got into all this fight, and so I had made all these demos where, I mean, we had, you know, and you played Samantha Fox on one of your streams, Samantha Fox Poker. So you know that.
Oh yeah, I did.
Digitized graphics weren't, you know, super detailed, but they were detailed enough. And we found some that you would not want to have your name on. Let's just put it that way. And then we put his name on them, and then we uploaded them and stuff. And through the grapevine, we heard that he had taken the disc like to the police station.
Oh.
and in my head, I think, like, now I think how funny that is. Some guy going into a police station with a floppy disk. He's like, these kids put my name on this pornography, you know. And I just think, what a funny, like, they're just going to have a computer and then, you know, load it up or something. But, you know, at the time we were like, uh-oh, like that got out of hand.
It's funny how you can, and I understand this as well. Maybe Pixels and Petzels do too, but you can actually directly draw a line from the innocent, no victim piracy of games. It sort of can lead you into bad places in a weird way, because I knew a guy who was pirating phone cards, and he was doing all that stuff, and I was getting software from him. He called me every day, you know, and one day he didn't call, and I never heard from him again, and I found out he got picked up, you know. And I knew a guy in college that was doing the credit card scams, and it was all guys that I used to copy discs with, you know. And even I tried to pull some, you know, let's just say low end baloney, you know, because it just seemed like the next logical step. I had games. Oh, I just had to pick up a copy of, like, how to rip off a change machine, or how to rip off a postage stamp machine, or how, you know, and you're like, oh, I'll give this a whirl. Or, hey, there's the Anarchist Cookbook. Let's try to make this explosive thing. And it's a short trip up the road right there.
It is. I'll tell you where I think I probably stepped over eventually was with phone stuff, because, you know, I just found anything you could do with the phone system. To me, the phone system is a lot like lock picking, where it's like it's a puzzle but you can't see it, you know. It's not like a jigsaw puzzle where you can see all the pieces. It's like, you know, there's a you know, a set of pins in there and springs, and I mean, you know what it is, and you have to feel with a set of picks what you're doing, but you can't see it, you know. And so you just, through trial and error, you have to figure out what's going on. And so, you know, poking around in the phone system always felt like that to me. Like, you know, there's some magic button that's like free call, boop, but you know, it's like, where is that button, you know, or how do you get to that? And I remember I'll tell you a quick story in a minute, but just that progression of like, well, if we're going to do all this, now we got to start calling long distance. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, now we're like 19 and 20 and 21. And you're like, we're kind of pushing this age where we might not want to be doing this. But my thing was the red box, which the red box was there's one term for it, the red box, but a red box really could be a million different things. But essentially, red box was a device that would send the audio tones that were reproduced by a payphone by putting it into the pay. So when you put a quarter in, those of you that are old enough to remember payphones, it would go beep, 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 beep. It would do 5 beeps or 2 for a dime or 1 for a nickel. So if you could reproduce those sounds, the phone didn't know whether it was a real quarter or the sounds because it was going by the sounds. Now, a lot of payphones, when you picked it up, if you would talk, you would say like, hello, hello, hello. The voice, the mouthpiece was muted, but it only became unmuted once you put a real coin in. So you'd have a nickel, you put a nickel in there, and then it would loosen up, and then you could put a quarter in, and then you could usually get your nickel back, you know? So we did that. I mean, just all the time. Like if I was out, I mean, it's like a parlor trick. You're with your friends, you go, hey, watch this. And the thing is that if you put in quarters and then you call somebody, you only got a certain amount of time. So after like 5 minutes, you know, or whatever, operator would break in and be like, please deposit, you know, another $1. And you're like, I sure will. Week. And then you use your little thing and you press it 4 times. And that worked really good until I took a road trip to Minneapolis, and I had this little tiny tone dialer that would play those tones, and it had a watch battery in it, but the battery started getting old. And when I got further north and it got cold, it was draining the battery. So, you know, when I left the house and I make a call, it would go beep, 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 beep real fast. But then when you got further north, it was like beep, 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 like it was getting slower and slower. And it got to a point where the operator could tell it wasn't real coins. And I was on a phone call and did that. And she was like, sir, those aren't real coins. And we know where you're at and we know who you're talking to. And I was like, click, drive off. Like, sorry, grandma, you're on your own. But yeah,
So, yeah,
go ahead.
My only memory of something like that, and it's very different, really. But a friend of mine in secondary school, I don't know how he knew this, but he knew that there was a certain number you could dial in the UK, which effectively connected you to an international line, and then you could dial some numbers and call America or something like that. But of course, we didn't know any American phone number, so we were just stood in a call box in the UK, going, right, what number should we try this time? And I think only once or twice we ever got any actual real phone numbers from anywhere. But it was just a cool thing to try and do while you, a teenager, stood in a phone box with 3 other people while it's chucking it down rain outside.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. The difference between those that end up, you know, stealing credit cards and going to jail and us is that we're just interested in doing it. Like, how does it work? Can we make that happen? Can we do it? And those that are doing the real crime, they're like wanting to scam, make money. That's really not what I think most of us were into. I never did any of that stuff. I think I was fortunate that the desire to do the neat things with technology I was able to do in other ways. So I didn't get caught up into any of that.
We had a couple of different groups, like local groups. I think one was called Hits, and it was like there was Hero, which was hackers and ruling the region of Oklahoma. And there was a couple other ones, but they would share all these things, you know. And I remember one time a guy posted this phone number and it said, this is the corporate number for Pizza Hut. And I guess it was a system to where at the end of the night, the stores could call in and it would upload their daily sales or something, you know? And I bet you I called that number 500. I just knew, like, if I guessed some or hit the right key or something, it was going to deliver me free pizzas. I just knew there was a way, and I would dial it and there would be like a thing. And it was just like war games to me. Like it would say Pizza Hut corporate thing, log on. And I'd be like, pepperoni man. And it would go and just hang up on me, you know, or store number 1. Nope, that wasn't it. All right, try to get 2. Nope, you know. And then later I worked at Pizza Hut and I worked at store like 13,000 or something. So I had a long way before I would have ever got there. But Aaron, you mentioned like there was always like there was just a line. I think you always knew that there was just a line you didn't cross. I had this friend and we had called he had called a long distance BBS and it said like, to get access, you got to do like one of 3 things. Like you got to give us, you got to upload something that we don't have, or you got to do this, or you got to give us a credit card. And so his mom did other people's taxes. Like she was one of those people that did taxes, and he just went in there and went through and was like, "Oh, here's a card." And I was like, "Are you kidding?" And he's like, "Ah, well, they probably won't trace it back to me." I go, "Well, unless they do, you know." But man, I never messed with credit cards. I never messed with money. Money tends to make people upset. So
yeah, that's the credit cards, and to a lesser extent, phone cards were a bridge too far. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I never went across that bridge trepidatiously, but I came running back. Both times the several times that I tried it, because it's not.
Well, they had those long distance codes, you know, and
Yeah.
you would just, it was just like a magic code.
Now we would use
like
dial outs and stuff like that to extend the range of our phone calls when you could find those through colleges and whatnot. But that was you're less likely to get people showed up at your house. That was the one thing I didn't want to happen. You know, because I knew I had all kinds of illegal crap back there, for example, and I thought it was a big deal. You know, it's sort of like you mentioned in your book, when you're sitting on all these pirated discs, you're like a dragon with its horde, you know, and you don't want anybody coming in and fool with it. You're thinking everyone's after it. Well, no one really gives a crap about your horde, but you don't know that.
Funny to think about it, like, you know, as a kid, like I was just a kid in my room with my Commodore with the monitor turned, so when my parents came in, they couldn't see what I was doing on the monitor, you know, and just like sitting there just for hours trying to hack into Pizza Hut, you know, and then my mom would come in and be like, "Hey, I made, you know, grilled cheese sandwiches." And be like, "Okay." You turn off the computer, and they had no idea. I mean, she thought I was in there playing Pac-Man, and I'm in there trying to hack Pizza Hut or something, you know. But
did you two fellas, Petzel and, because I know Flack did, but either one of you guys jump in. Were you guys big time pirates back in the day?
As big as I could be, yeah. I only had certain access. There wasn't, where I lived, calling long distance was like, you might as well just, you know, give up, you know, life at that point. My parents find a long distance call and you're just not leaving the house for the next month, and you're going to be in such pain that you wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
So it was just a small town that I grew up in that when my friend's uncle would come, he was in the army, and he would come and bring his Commodore 64 discs. We would copy as much as we could. He'd bring his disk drive over. It wasn't a 1541, it was like the Excelsior or something.
Yeah.
And so we'd copy as much as we could, but so as much as I could.
Did you get involved in any sort of, like Flack mentions on his show and in the book, these copy fests or copy groups? I was in a couple. Did you ever get have a big no group copying parties for you?
It was hard to find another person with a computer. That was,
well, I mean, yeah. Where, if I could ask, what part of the country did you grow up in?
So I grew up in a small town called Bluffton, Indiana. It's south of Fort Wayne, Indiana. So it's
I've been there a few times.
Yeah, so it's just out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that in your case. What about you, Pix? Did you ever get any of that action?
I think it's a very similar story. It's more about the accessibility, really. I had a few friends who had like the same systems as me. So back in the the old Spectrum days. I had a couple of friends, and you get the old tape deck out with the high-speed dubbing, and stick a blank tape in one side and then specky tape in the other, and try and copy it. And sometimes it'd work, and sometimes it wouldn't. And then on the Amiga, you'd get out your X copy and copy it. But I only ever copied things that a couple of mates had. I didn't have access to copy parties or even like the markets where they're selling discs for 50p or anything like that, really. So my access to piracy was quite limited purely by the pool of people that I was able to copy from, kind of thing. So
before I released Commodore, I was really naive in the fact that I did not know that the UK scene was so cassette based. Like I literally and this is true. I had a data set, which was the Commodore, cassette tape player. I had a data set for like 3 days. Like I got it and I was like, what is this crap? Like, no way. And I didn't know anybody that had a Commodore for longer than a month that used a data set. Like it was just not a thing here.
Oh man, I had tape. I used tape forever on my, but it wasn't on the C64. Listen, he mentioned the dubbing the tapes. That was the glory days of piracy because you could just do it while you do something else. Don't even think about it. The old dual set cassette recorder. I had the Coco. The majority of my Coco game library was on tape early on, and it was great. And you could put like a zillion games on a cassette. And then you were good to go. So I would go to I knew some guys that had a Coco at the place I took karate. So we would I'd go and get a bunch of tapes, and during karate, we would have the boom box out there just going to work, copying these suckers. And when I got home from karate, that's one of the main reasons I like karate so much. I got to have free games at the karate.
We had the TRS-80 first, the Model 3 with a cassette drive. And I remember going with my dad to like strangers' houses so he could copy a tape. And I think that's like real quick you learn the art of small talk because that was not fast, Yeah. Like if you're gonna copy some tape and you'd be like,
there it is.
How do you? Mine aren't. I have a couple, but mine aren't that handy. Mine are far away.
The Coco ones were far less cool looking than the C64 ones. They just looked like tape drives you'd get at Radio Shack. They just somebody stuck a Tandy label on, which is exactly what they were. They weren't cool and rounded off like that. Or the Atari 8-bits have a kind of a cool looking one too. Coco, we didn't get that.
Yeah, I had a data set for a year for my first year of having the Commodore 64.
Did you?
And had no pre-published games. Had to type them in. And so they were all saved games from books. That's all I had.
That's tough sledding right there.
I'm sure it probably was, but in my memory, I don't remember ever seeing original Commodore software being sold on cassettes here. It was just like PD, public domain stuff.
I didn't see a lot of C64 stuff for sale anywhere, if I'm honest. I saw more. I mean, I occasionally. What were the old? The old computer stores, which is where I'd see most of the stuff I saw. But I mean, mostly the stuff I saw back in the day. I'm trying to think when I would have seen. It would have been the early 80s. Like who was selling C64 software back then? Flack, do you remember?
Toys R Us.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Kmart.
Yeah.
Were they selling the discs or just the cartridges?
Cassettes.
Kmart there you go. I am in West Virginia, so everything here is a little bit. By the time I got a PC, we probably were getting the Commodore stuff into town because they were so far. They're so far behind. Brock mentioned something. I had to laugh when we were talking about Copy Fest. He said, "You mean computer users groups?" Which is exactly what they were. Because I mean, that's what I was in a couple users groups, and that was all they did was pirate software and then show off their crap. Did you guys get into? Were you guys any formal users groups back in the day? Neither one of you. I know you were, Flack.
There were no users groups to get into, really, or none that I knew of.
And neither one of you guys did any. Did you do any BBSing on your machines?
So the only BBSing I would do was with my one friend that also had a Commodore 64. we would call each other and we would type to each other. And then we pick up the phone and talk at the same time the modem was on, so we could type and talk at the same time, and of course listen to the tones.
Well,
I completely missed out on the BBSing era. I just remember reading about it in magazines and thinking, "Oh, that seems really cool," but I never actually got to do it.
I feel bad for you, especially Petzel. You say you graduated in '90s. Is that what you said?
91.
90.
Yeah,
Well, you're not too far behind me, unfortunately for you. I'm surprised because BBS. I mean, I was all up in it, brother. You know, and I know Flack was too. I'm surprised because Pixel's a little bit younger.
The area that I lived, it was a phone system anomaly. You couldn't call anywhere. You couldn't call to the north side of Bluffton without it being a long distance call.
Yeah.
And it gives a town of 10,000 people. It's not a large town.
That's something people don't get anymore, is the fact that you had to pay
private
for all
phone
the calls.
companies.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's what Super Tech Boy said in the chat. In the UK, all your calls were paid, including local calls. In fact, I was just remembering the fact that there was the concept of a local call and a national call. So, so if you called somewhere outside of the town, it would cost more money to call people there, which is obviously long gone. I'd forgotten it even existed until just this second. So,
when I went to college, I lived in an area where it was, if you lived, I was far enough outside the city where if you lived in the city, it was free to call me, but it was long distance for me to call the same people back. It was only free for them to call out. So like my mom would say, you know, every Wednesday at 7, you better be home, because she would call me because I would never call.
It's, you know, even when I was in college, if I want to talk to my buddy Hose, you guys, you know, Hose is the guy that I call wrestling with, so we're still buddies. But I couldn't call him from Huntington, where I lived in my apartment. And keep in mind, this is like 90, 91 or 92. It's not like this is 82. I had to hop in the car and drive up to Ona, which is about, 15 miles up the road. And then I could call, so there was a payphone there. I could call him there so we could chat, because we would chat for like maybe 45 minutes or an hour, you know. And he only lived another 15 miles past the phone. So I had to basically, it was so stupid. I don't know why I did it. And then one day I found out there was a Dairy Queen in Huntington that for whatever reason, he was in their calling circle. And I used to go there and I would watch wrestling. They had these, I don't know, have you ever seen these restaurants that had these little portable TVs on the table and they were coin operated? Did you ever see that?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and they had cable. Like, I don't know how, but I mean, so I'd put my money in there. I'd turn wrestling on. I'd give Hose a phone call. You know, because they had phones every table, and we would watch wrestling. You know, it was, my God, I was desperately lonely, I guess, back in the day. But I don't miss the phone system at all. And this is one of the reasons why we were so gung-ho and getting all these illegal phone calls, because they had you by the short and curlies. You couldn't do anything without paying a fortune.
Yeah. You know, I ran my DOS BBS until right up until the time I moved to Spokane. So about 96. And in late 94, early 95 was when all of my friends discovered the internet. And it was, you know, at that time it was all text based. You know what I mean? It wasn't World Wide Web. And I remember like in the spring of 95, a friend was like, I was on this website and it was playing music. I was like, playing music? What the heck are you talking about? Like I was just FTPing and IRC. That was all I did, you know? And, so anyway, I honestly thought that the internet was a fad, and I was the BBS was my bread and butter. It was like my clubhouse. It was where my friends called, where my friends came, where we hung out. And it was like, the feds are not listening to your BBS. It's just a phone line. You know what I mean? Like it's a private little area where you would chat about stuff, and your parents couldn't figure out how to log into it. So it was pretty much like an encrypted little box, you know? And I had got on the internet, and so I would call the internet, and then like I would find something like, I found a thing one time. It was like a trove of like, here's 100 graphic, like GIF files or GIF files of Scooby-Doo and 80s characters. And I download all that, and then I go put it on my BBS, and I'd be like, hey, now we've got a graphics area. You know, I mean, I was just using the internet just to feed the BBS, because the BBS was my bread and butter, you know. I mean, proverbially, like, I wasn't making money, but you know what I mean? Like, that was always the goal, and the internet was just feeding the BBS. And I remember one time, like, I just watched over months, I just watched my callers go down and down and down. Like, I had 2 phone lines and I had all this different stuff, and it was just going down and down. And I wrote like the maddest, furious message I've ever written. Like that message, like when you find out your girlfriend is cheating on with your best friend, like that kind of message, just like filled with hate. And I was like, you jerks will be back. You'll get over your little internet fad and you'll all be calling back here, you know. And it was like a whole rant about how the internet can't possibly last and all that, you know. And you know who read that? Me, because nobody's calling the BBS anymore. It's just me by myself.
You still have that rant somewhere on your BBS?
I do. I'm sure I do.
You should dig that up. That'd probably be hilarity to listen to. You know, I mean, it's funny how for me, I can see the writing on the wall. I don't know how everybody else got on the internet, but over here, the first time I got on it was AOL. I mean, that's the easiest way to get onto it. Yeah, we didn't have another provider. So FTP, I mean, when we started doing like news groups, that's the only place I could do it. And World Wide Web, we didn't have any providers at the time in West Virginia. That was the only one. And then once we got like Earthlink or something like that, I was gone because I knew AOL sucked even before I, jumped on. But you could tell because you could do so much more stuff, and you could have all those simultaneous connections at once. You know, the BBS, as much as I liked it, it was obviously inferior in every conceivable way. You could get stuff quicker in bulk. There were more people to contribute more stuff. I mean, it was you could see it happening. I just remember I don't remember one day just saying, "Well, I'm done calling BBSs." I guess one day it's just like I just stopped. Like I never knew. I just called my last BBS at the time. It just was over. It's kind of weird to think about it now because BBS is such a big deal. But the internet was a seamless transition for me. I just went right to it.
You know, I got back into calling BBSs. I've tried it off and on for the past 4 or 5 years, and I always do it a little bit, and then it goes away. And I do it. One of my Patreon supporters runs a BBS like in Sweden or something. It's a big time Commodore BBS, and I've called it. You know,
the Boar's Head Tavern. Is that that one?
Yeah. And of course, they're all Telnet, but you could do it on the Mister or C64 Ultimate, any of these things that could get online. You can use the real hardware, the Mister or something, and it's amazing. Every time I get back into it, like how fast, like part of my brain is like the BBS era is the greatest era of all time. Like I never had more fun online. I never, it was just amazing time. And then you call one and you'll read a post and then you go, well, that's interesting. I'm going to copy and paste that. And then you go, oh, wait, a mouse doesn't work in this. There is no copy or paste. You can't post a link to an inline picture. There's no graphic. And you're like, I mean, the other part, like the logic brain is like, yeah, it does kind of suck, but you don't want to admit it,
Well, I'll tell you. So when I was a young adult, I lived in Evansville, and we had BBSs. And so this is how I ended up deciding I was going to buy a PC. I would use my Amiga. I had a 14.4 modem. I would call, I cannot remember the name of the BBS. I can picture the guy who owned it, but I can't remember the name of the BBS. I would call with my Amiga. The BBS had the ability to go on the internet. It was a telnet session. So I would get into that telnet session through the BBS, use links to then find something to download it into my account that was in this telnet session. Then once I had downloaded it from the internet into that session, then I would use Z modem to transfer that file from the server to my Amiga. and then hopefully find a floppy disk somewhere to save that on. It would be compressed. I would have to use like LHARC or whatever to decompress it, and then I have a picture. Hey!
Did you get an email address with that? I called a BBS that was also connected to the internet, and they were like, "You now have your own email address." And my email address was like jack.flack@late.night.bbs.telepath.us.ok. I was like,
So
there's nobody ever emailed me at that. I couldn't remember it.
I actually did have, not through that one, but through the Evansville library, I had an email address, and it was this long. I've tried many times to find it, but what they would do is you call into the library's BBS, check your mail, send mail. Then once a day, the library would call the University of Southern Indiana and transfer all the mail.
Yes, toss mail.
And then once you get your new mail, your mail will go out once a day. So these people that complain, "Oh, I didn't get this mail. It took 30 seconds to show up." I'm like, it used to be one day before I got the message.
You know, that's one thing that is hard for people that didn't call BBSs. Like I called like I've shown Aaron my BBS. Like there was a time I was calling like 50 BBSs, like they were all active, you know. So
Yeah.
and like when through the week you'd cycle through and call as many as you can. A lot of them more than once. But if someone sent you a message, it was just on that BBS. It didn't go anywhere else. So I mean, somebody would email you, and then you'd log in 4 days later and be like, "Oh, you've got a message," and then you respond. You're like, "Yes, I'll be at your party 2 days ago." Like, you know,
Yeah.
like, but it was constantly just. It would be like if you mailed somebody a letter now, but you just left it in your mailbox and nobody came and got it. Like you had to drive around to all your friends and check their mailboxes to see if there's a letter for you.
Hey, you know, Pixels, I want to ask you a question because since you're in the UK over there, and I know I've heard about this thing, but I don't know much about it. Didn't you guys have some kind of gimmick that would come across the TV? It was like some kind of interactive gimmick. What's the scoop on that? Were you into that? Did you have access to it?
Yeah. So we had a thing called teletext and CFAX. So the idea was they used the sort of the extra lines of data that are outside the normal visible picture on the screen to store data, and pretty much all TVs had a button, or at a certain point in time, all TVs had a button that you could press, which would bring up this sort of kind of graphics mode style sort of text, but with some blocky graphics system to get information. Now there were sort of two things that was used for. One was page 888, which was your closed captioning for deaf people. So that was kind of built in if the programs were transmitting it. But there was so much other stuff on there as well. So there were things like there was like classifieds for holidays, and you could watch through pages and pages of holidays and go, "Oh, I want to go to Spain. I'll dial the number that it's got on there." There was something called Digitizer, which was like the video game, like mini magazine kind of thing. So basically, you'd go on there, you press the button for teletext, it load up page 100, I think it was, and then you'd start type in a 3-digit number to go to whatever page you wanted to go to. So it's like a very simple internet, basically.
How long did it take to load a page on that?
Not very long. It was pretty. I mean, it wasn't like lightning fast or anything, but it was quick enough. Obviously, it was all coming through your telephone aerial. So if the weather was particularly bad or something, it might be a little bit slower or a little bit corrupted when it arrived. But most of the time, it was fine. But as I say, you had all sorts of stuff in there, but it had some functionality which allowed you to sort of hide and reveal bits of text. So you can, as you can imagine, that led to like mini kind of like quiz kind of games and things like that. So you'd have a question and then you'd answer it, and then you press the reveal button to see whether you got it right and things like that. But it was very clever. And obviously it went through things like there was a TV guide in there that you could use. There was news pages, sports pages, all the things you would expect from an early internet, basically.
Could you videotape that?
Well, that's one of the things that they've done now. I think it depends on the way you taped it. You wouldn't tape it back in the day, but what people are finding now is the old VHS tapes that they had from back in the day, they can now go back in and extract the pages of teletext, and they're kind of using those to put on the internet and things like that. So
that's what years
pretty cool.
What years do you figure this was active?
It's got to be 80s and 90s, I think. It was probably around about those times.
It's super neat.
Was that a free service, or did you have to pay to get that?
No, it was all came with your normal television stuff. So
that's real cool. I mean, I like the idea that everyone has access to it as well. Because I mean, that'd be a good way to get out mass information too. We had nothing like that here, and in a place like West Virginia, for example, that would have been great just to get any sort of information. So I can see the benefits aside from just being entertaining.
It's something we kind of took for granted, I think. I think it's only more recently that I think people have started to realise that that was just a kind of British thing, potentially a European thing as well. But you kind of assume everyone just knows what it is because it was so ubiquitous back in the day.
How neat.
The internet says it was rolled out in the 70s, actually. So
jeez, that is
went back,
unbelievable to me.
Went back a fair old way.
It was just, and so for the most part, it was just something that was just built right into the TV, the ability to see this stuff.
Yeah, you just be a button on the remote, and away you go.
That's crazy.
It's very cool.
Yeah. Well, shucks. I mean, I guess we've been on for a couple hours, so we might as well put this thing to bed. If you showed up to watch me play DOS games, whoops. There you go. Play a little bit there, but hey, I like to have a nice conversation. You may have noticed, and it was great to test this thing out. And boy, I had a lot of fun talking to you guys. Thanks for coming on to help me out here and just to chat. You get a guy like me started on BBS, and we could sit here for a week. If the Chud was in here, it'd be a month because he's a big BBS guy from back in the day too. And I love talking about that stuff. I know Flack was as well. So I want to say thanks to Pix. Pix, quick, plug your gimmick real quick before we go.
Yeah, you can get Amiga Addict magazine and Pixel Addict magazine at addict.media or amiga-addict.com. Christmas issue is available right now, and so ready to stick into your Christmas stockings. Enjoy.
Very good, very good. Petzel, you got anything you want to plug?
Hey, I'll plug Commodore Chronicles and Fine and Tandy.
Oh man, Adam's the fix is in.
Yeah,
the payoff. Just make sure you get that check made out.
That's right.
Black, what about? I know you've got all sorts of crazy stuff going on.
Oh yeah, always doing podcasts and streams and blog posts and all kinds of stuff. Just go to robohara.com or podcast.robohara.com. You can find links to most of it there.
Hey, if you're listening to this, go over to Rob O'Hara on Twitch. Make sure you follow him. Every Wednesday, he gets some sweet action. Occasionally, he'll get into some even weirder action on Saturday nights with a little music party. You need to bring that back, Flack.
Yeah, that was
I always
fun.
enjoy that. That's a lot of fun. Well, again, thanks for hanging out with us. I hope you found this interesting. We will catch you guys on the flip side. I'll be back, Jack, probably tomorrow night for the TSI, TeamSpeak Regulars. I think we're going to kick the tires on the new Evil Dead game. So let me give that a whirl. But we will let you guys get out of here. Thanks again, everybody. And we will talk to you guys again on the flip side. Adios, everyone.
Adios.